So good morning, everyone, and welcome to Culture Works Consortium Conversation Hub. Volker and I are a bit surprised it's already 9:30. We're having a lovely little conversation backstage, and suddenly it was like, oh gosh, we need to go live.
Yeah, haven't even got a chance to get my second coffee this morning. Boost my productivity. There we go.
Exactly. So today we're talking about what productivity is and some productivity hacks. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat and we will have some time at the end if there's any questions. If you're watching on catch up, obviously feel free to message us. But we really wanted to start by talking about actually what do we mean by being productive? It isn't about just ticking a load of stuff off your list, right, Volker?
No.
So it's about that meaningful outcomes. So actually, do we understand what we should be doing? What is our purpose? And are we doing the things that meet that purpose, that company objective, your personal purpose? So what are the outcomes that we're looking for? Because we could all write a list and tick everything off. But actually, if they're not meaningful, that really isn't productive. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Volker.
Yeah, to be honest, I think you're hitting on a point there, because if you think about it, we all like, I mean, I'm a big to-do list fan, and I know Michael and I discussed that, right?
Yeah.
To-do, non-to-do list. Because I don't get the idea of non-to-do list. I get the idea of not doing certain things because they don't add value, right? So I, I'm a big fan of getting things done. David Allen. And David Allen always said, anything that's in your brain, just write it down, put it on to-do list so you know where you find it. And you might have one to-do list for, a someday maybe list, right? So I don't know, one day I want to learn how to play golf properly, right? And it's sitting there, it's out of your mind. And once you're ready and you got the time, you might bring it back and say, okay, let's do that. Yeah. But the worst thing is, to your point, just having a list for the sake of a list and just, I put this list down and I tick all these things off. You get the dopamine hit every time you tick something off and it feels really good.
Yeah.
But you're not making any progress. So the question is, does the task, the activity you do actually propel you forward? And I think the book, does a boat make you, does a boat make you go faster? Something like that. There's a
I can't remember what it's called now, but yeah
something like that. There's a book about a boat and
and going faster. And it is about that smarter, working smarter, not harder. It isn't about, for me, wearing that badge of busyness.
Yeah.
And I was definitely, and still find myself going into that badge of busyness, feeling that you had to be busy all the time.
Yeah.
And actually not recognizing that rest and recovery are a massively important part of being productive.
Yeah. There's a chap called, and I think he stopped doing that kind of work. He changed, if I say, careers, and I don't know where it is, but it's somewhere. Tony Schwartz, The Way We're Working Isn't Working, if you know that book.
Yeah.
So I put a presentation together for my team back in, I think, 2010, 2011. And he talked a lot about the ultradian rhythms, like 90 minutes productivity. Yeah. You shouldn't have meetings longer than 90 minutes because after that, your attention span just goes down. So us having back-to-back meetings on a screen, it's not very productive. And if you do that all day long, it's not a badge of honor and go like, oh, I've spent 10 hours on Zoom today, right? It's like, no, but you could have not been productive as much as you think you're productive. And I discussed it actually with the coachee the other day, without wanting to name the person, obviously. I disclose details, which I can't. But she literally worked all day long. She was very good in taking breaks, which obviously is so important to rejuvenate and, but she likes to just carry on working. But you need to have this break where you go like, that's it. And I always, I'm a big advocate of my lunchtime nap, and I always say that. I get up really early.
Yeah.
I'm usually at my desk at 8:30. I'm in course all morning. I'm trying to take an hour and a half for lunch, where I take the dog for a walk, I take my nap, I have a proper break, which then means, come 6 o'clock, I'm still buzzing. I still got the energy.
Yeah. And it's really interesting that you say that, because we all have energy at different times of the day.
Yeah.
So actually understanding where our energy surges are and when we feel energized helps us to become more productive. I know I'm actually much better in the morning than I am in the evening. So my energy level in the morning is much higher. Just is. It's the way it is. Afternoon is where I have my slump, and then sometimes I have a spurt early evening. But once I'm done that, so I know if I need to do something hard and difficult, I need to do that in the morning.
Yeah, eat your frog.
Yeah, yes, I'm eating my frog, but my eating the frog is in the morning. For someone else, that might be early afternoon.
Yeah.
Because actually that's where their highest energy level is. So whilst I get the eat the frog, do something hard and difficult first thing, I think you also need to look at where do I get my energy? When am I getting my energy? Because actually if it's hard and difficult, you might want to choose a different time to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's recognizing that, right? Because I have a lot more energy in the morning as well. So I'm, clearly I get up early. I'm a morning person, right? I'm not getting up because, I want to sleep longer. And, funny enough, I have enough energy after 6, 7 o'clock, but then come 8, 9 o'clock, it's ridiculous anyway, right? If you're working from 8 till 8 every day. I do notice, I'm capable of doing stuff, but it's not, to your point, it's not productive, right? It's not something that really moves the needle forward. Couple emails, bit of admin, no problem, 10 o'clock at night if I have to. But why would we have to, right? Because we also need to, and I think that's a point you want to make as well, right? In terms of productivity, you have to have these boundaries. You have to say, okay, come 6 o'clock, come 7 o'clock, whatever your time is, that's it, And when you work for yourself, and I don't know if you experience that, it's almost more difficult to switch off.
Yeah.
Right? Because if it's a company, you almost go like, I only get paid until 6 o'clock, I might as well log off. When you work for yourself, it never stops, right?
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think, for me, one of the things that I wasn't very good at was putting real boundaries in. And I recognize that I work for myself, so I do need to be flexible about that. But actually understanding what are those boundaries, because I could sit here all day every day and not get anything done, everything done. It's just like, and I used to feel like that with work as well. I'd work when I was in corporate for very long hours, but realize actually on reflection, I wasn't productive.
Yeah.
So it's, I think for me, just understanding what does productive mean to me? What's my purpose? What is the company's purpose if you're in a company? And what do I do to actually achieve that purpose? And I quite often talk to people about if what you are doing at work does not fulfill the vision or mission or values of the organization, you really should be asking, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Why am I doing this? Because you might be just ticking things off the list for the sake of ticking things off the list.
Yeah, exactly. It's about, does it move you in the right direction? Does it move you towards your bigger goal, right? What you're working on at the moment.
Yeah.
So if your boss comes around the corner, that's a bit of more prioritization than it is productivity, but it kind of is the same direction. But if your boss comes around the corner, oh, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this, and delegates all that stuff to you, and you go like, I don't have time for all that. The typical question I always suggest to ask is, so I can do this and I can do this, but then I have to deprioritize this. Or what do you want me to deprioritize?
Yeah.
And then once of a sudden the boss might go like, oh, actually, good question, right? I can't give you all of that because it's all important, or no, actually some things are here that are not that important. So, sometimes a task can't be ticked off the list for days, and it feels unproductive, but that's why you should break tasks down, right, into mini tasks, so you actually know you're making progress.
Yeah, and I think Volker, you were talking earlier really about that. Actually, talking about really Pomodoro technique, which for anyone who doesn't know what it is, you set a timer for a certain amount of time. Could be 35 minutes, could be 50 minutes, whatever you want to, and you just focus on that task for that amount of time. And after that, you can take a 10-minute break. And that really works if you are feeling overwhelmed by a huge task. So actually, let me just focus on this for the next 35 minutes. I do it for 50 minutes because that works for me. I've sort of worked out where that goes. And actually, what I find is that breaks down that task into something that is manageable, which is a 50-minute focus. What I tend to find is when I get to 50 minutes, actually, I'm into it and I do carry on. But I've set myself a really clear boundary to say, you're fine. If you focus on this for 50 minutes, you can have a 10-minute coffee break.
Yeah.
And it allows me to focus and be really productive. Whereas if I sat there and thought, there's 10 hours work here, I would potentially feel really overwhelmed by that. I've broken it down into really manageable, and it really works for me. Might not work for everyone, but it absolutely works for me.
Yeah. Pomodoro, I have a love-hate relationship with Pomodoro. I totally see how it works, right?
Yeah.
I tend to agree. When I tried it before, it's 45 minutes for me. It's not 25. I mean, I think 25 is the original Pomodoro, e.g. how long it takes to cook the pasta, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But I think it helps a lot of people to stop procrastination as well, right? Because they say, okay, the next 45 minutes, focus on this task, nothing else, and just put their head down.
Yeah.
If I say I don't need that, I don't procrastinate a lot. So I don't know it's sprints. But having said that, I almost do it, differently by time blocking. I think time blocking is very similar, right?
Yeah.
Because essentially, if I have a task I really need to get done, so doing a presentation, usually it's presentations, where I go like, I need a chunk of time, I need an hour to work on that.
Yeah.
I put it in my diary. And then once it's in my diary, I spend that hour working on the presentation, which is a similar way of doing it. I guess with the difference, you actually block the time out in your diary.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm a big fan of time blocking. Absolutely. I recognise that I really, you talked earlier about going from meetings to meetings to meetings.
Yeah.
When I was in corporate, we had a no meeting Friday policy.
Brilliant.
So that everybody could leave at the end of that, unless obviously something's on fire, and I really mean you have to have a meeting for it. But you couldn't put meetings in on a Friday unless you had to really justify why you were doing that. So that everybody could leave that week feeling that they'd got everything sorted and they had time to do those bigger pieces. I cannot, within 15 minutes from meeting to meeting, do anything big. So I tend to have a list of really small things that I can do in that 15 minutes, feel a little bit productive, have that hit of dopamine, and tick it off the list. It may not be the most productive thing that I need to do on my list, but it gets something off my list.
Yeah.
Absolute time blocking is brilliant because you can then start to really plan.
Yeah. Yeah, I find in between meetings, if you have 10, 15 minutes, I just have enough time for bio break, couple of emails and get myself a cup of tea, right? So that's about it. And to be honest, every email becomes a task sometimes, right? So and that's where, to be honest, I sometimes still struggle to deprioritize emails.
Yeah.
So a friend of mine told me, and that's years ago, I have to admit, Volker, emails are not important, they can wait. And she was right. Most emails can wait. But I also, I like to get a response from an email. So I like to be, responding to emails. But I find myself more and more to delay emails. And what I've actually done, so you're meeting Free Friday, which, I love that idea of. I started having a meeting free half day once a week where, it's my admin time, it's my emailing time, it's my preparation time. I don't know, I do my finances, I do invoicing, whatever I do. I don't like to tell people which day it is, but it's, spoiler alert, it's not a Friday for me, because Fridays are my busiest days at the moment. So, but blocking your calendar out is it's so important just to work, right? Because otherwise you can be inundated with calls and meetings, and it's a good problem to have, right? Especially if all the meetings get paid. Talking as a as an individual and freelancer, but you need that break time as well.
Yeah. And I think, we're talking about freelancing, but actually within the corporate world, having those times and setting boundaries is really important. I realized I had far too much of an open door policy in that anybody could come in, have a conversation, ask something, which I really wanted to generate that as a senior leader within the team. It's that I had an open door policy, but I had to also protect some of my time. And I used to say, right, this, I'm not answering my phone. I need to switch my emails off because I'm dreadful. If an email pops up, oh, what's that about? And I set very clear boundaries with my team to say, this is my do not disturb time. This is my time. Particularly if you're in a leadership role, to really start to think about what should we be doing? What does the vision, mission? What is the strategy moving forward? Because we cannot be in tactical doing all the time. We need to spend time thinking about the bigger picture, and you cannot do that if you are constantly bombarded. So you don't become productive in that area.
I 100% agree. I mean, one of the best tips one of my ex-bosses gave me, he says, Volker, the reason you have a team is so you don't have to do the work, right? So in theory, you should have 30% of your day not planned anyway, right? So only plan 70% of your day. And then those 30%, if you're sitting there twiddling your thumb, you're doing a good job because, you have thinking time, to your point, but then also your team is doing all the work.
Yeah.
However, I don't see many managers that just sit there and twiddling their thumbs because there's always something coming up. There's always a team member coming to you and go like, Volker, can I have a minute? Of course you can have a minute, right? Which turns into half an hour, and there might be a client issue or whatever it is. So in the corporate world, if you think about it, if you have meetings from 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock until 6 o'clock, back to back, maybe half an hour for lunch or your sandwich, during a meeting, when do you do your time, your emails, when do you start managing people, it's after 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
And I remember I once worked for a company. I only lasted 6 months, to be honest. Was luckily an interim role. Would have not considered it as a full-time role. But basically, I was so busy during the day, I literally didn't even have time to look at my email. So people came to me and says, have you seen my email? And I'm like, nope. If it's important, just come to me. And I spent every evening an hour and a half on the train home just going through emails. And it was ridiculous, right? I mean, and to your point, it wasn't productive.
Yeah. And I think it's, it's that fine balance between wanting to support your team, but also protecting that thinking time. but actually also giving your team autonomy and delegation rights to do things. Because if you're always available, you're not productive. They aren't productive thinkers and owning it, because it's so much easier to just ask that question. Yeah. If you protect that time and say, you know what, this is half a day when I am doing this. And I think I do go back to this badge of busyness that we still seem to hold very dear, that we should always, how are you? Oh, I'm really busy. But are we busy doing the right stuff? Because if we are not busy doing the right stuff, we are not productive.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm a massive list writer, because if not, it's in my head all the time and I'm trying to think about it. I always tell this story as when I worked in corporate, and it was when we used to have desk phones, and I'd wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and think, oh, I need to remember to do this, and I'd phone myself at work and leave myself a voicemail. I was ever so polite, Volker. I used to go, hello, remember to do this, bye.
Brilliant.
And I'd wake up in the morning and I'd drive to work and I think, oh, I've got 3 voicemails. They were all from me. Completely forgotten I'd done it. But actually writing it down, getting it out of your head, and then re-looking at it, and sometimes asking that question, if I don't do this, will it matter in 30 days?
Yeah.
If you are unsure about whether you should be doing something, whether it's productive, does it align with our company vision? Does it align with our mission? Does it align with my purpose? If I don't do it, what is the impact?
Yeah.
That helps us become much more productive. Asking the why. Why am I doing this?
Yeah. It's funny you're saying that with the writing it out of your head, because I just took a note and I need to put a blog post out for that. But when I must be lying, I want to say 4 years old. I probably was a lot older. I must have been 7 or 8. Yeah. I started writing things down on a Post-it note on the bedside table when I couldn't sleep at night. Yeah. You know, because you got all these things in your head, and there is, and I don't know if that's still typical or not, but my kids had I don't know what they called it, essentially a monster. You can, when you were afraid of something, you could just write it down and put it into the monster's head.
Okay, yeah.
So we know from early childhood actually that it works, right? And that's why I'm such a big fan of getting things done, David Allen. I mean, he really mastered productivity, you know, and systems and how those systems work. Although, you know, it sounds very arrogant, but when I visited a seminar in 2008, I already did 90% of what he suggested, which was, you know, I mean, I'm already doing it. Did I consciously do it? Not all of them. And do I agree with all his methods? Not really, because some of the stuff is now a bit stuck in time, right? With his different inboxes and paper inboxes, etc. But having said that, he revolutionized the thinking around productivity. And another example was it Nirayal, or what's the chap's name? I'm trying to remember. He wrote a book. I don't know if it was a guy with Atomic Habits or not, but one of those productivity guys that came up recently and got quite popular. He's a university professor, and he says he has a Slack channel where people can ask questions. And because he's a university professor, he's very tight on his time. He says, you know, whichever day it was, every Wednesday afternoon, that's when he answers all the Slack messages, emails, and also has his, you know, office hours. So only on Wednesday afternoons, he goes into the Slack channel. So even if he had time on a Friday afternoon, he doesn't go into that Slack channel and helps people. He says this is reserved for that Slack channel, for any emails regarding that topic, and obviously people that come into his office during that time. And he only works on it, I don't know, those 4 hours he blocks on a Wednesday afternoon. And that, you know, I really admire that, if I say, those boundaries, right? That willpower, because I'm naturally someone, I like to just help people, right? So I would go like, oh, half an hour, I just have a quick peek if I can help anyone. but you sometimes have to be so strict with your time. And I notice that more and more because I make my diary available to people to book time.
Mm-hmm.
And I started putting more restrictions on that, just
Yeah.
so I don't switch, things in my head too often.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really important if you've got boundaries, not to have wobbly boundaries, right?
Yeah.
And I know I've done that in the past. I'm trying to get better, still do it, still have a wobbly boundary every so often. But I think we've both talked about, for me, making a list gets it out of my head and into something that I can look at and go, what are the priorities on this list? Because productivity and prioritization sit hand in hand.
Yeah.
They're not separate things. Time boxing or time blocking, whatever we want to call it, for me, really important. Giving myself space and time to think about why I am doing this. How is it?
Yeah.
How is it actually aligning to what I do? Having rest. And I think for me, Volker, one of the things that I've recognized, and I know you meditate as well, is actually if I'm feeling really overwhelmed and I am not being productive because I've got 100 things going around in my head and I don't know what I need to be doing, I will deliberately take 10 minutes out and do a guided meditation. I have much more clarity in my thought at the end of that.
100%. I totally subscribe to that. So for me, as I say, it's almost that lunchtime nap, which kind of resets my brain. If you're not a napper, so just this kind of a 3-minute breathing space or 3-step breathing space, 10-minute meditation, just sitting in the garden if you have a garden and stare at the green space and listening to the birds. Just doing nothing for 10 minutes and not go like, oh, I'm overwhelmed with work. I'm going to go on Instagram or TikTok and scroll through that for 10 minutes.
Scroll.
Not the same, it's you need to get literally out of your head or into your head, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah. That pause moment, pause is so important in so many aspects of our life, right? Taking that pause, recognizing that actually you become much more productive when you have clarity, and sometimes having that pause will help you. Conscious, we've got 2 minutes at the end, so I think for me, just to wrap it up, it is about that working smarter, not harder. It's not about wearing the badge of busyness. It's working towards meaningful outcomes and putting in strategies that support you to be productive. Asking the why. Anything you want to add, Volker?
I think one last thing to add, which we haven't discussed yet. I meant to say it earlier because I forgot, because you said you turned your emails off. Your email notifications. Turn notifications off. So don't even get tempted by this little ping. I worked with an executive once, and he goes like, oh, of course I have notifications on my phone. I said, the pinging noise. He says, yeah. So I'm like, so how do you survive? As an executive, you get an email every minute. It's like, he turned it off. He should have seen him the week after when he came back to the coaching session. He says, Volker, it's so great. It's like no notifications. I said, did you miss anything? No. The emails were still there.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, thank you for listening. If you want to explore anything any further, please email, go onto the Culture Works Consortium website and contact us there, or reach out to Volker or I for any further information. And we will see you next week for more Conversation Hubs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.